Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I'd like to talk about gay men and coping with specific traumas, Part 2. So in Part 1 of this discussion, I talked about coping with specific traumas that include medical, legal, academic, and criminal traumas, and how to cope with them. Here in Part 2, I will discuss workplace, family of origin, political, and social and peer traumas, and how to cope with them. So let's start with what is in my list. You might have heard in the previous episode about the first 4. Now let's talk about number 5. Number 5, in terms of traumas, is workplace bullying or sexual harassment. So, as I mentioned, my own experiences with severe workplace bullying as an adult that went way beyond any school bullying that I experienced. The adult stuff was actually worse in my case. One perpetrator was a gay male supervisor I had put my trust in who sexually harassed me. But several others were women. Women are often the victims of workplace bullying or harassment or discrimination. But in my case, these were women in positions of power over me as a young worker, particularly in the nonprofit world, and that lorded their power over my livelihood, my ability to support myself as an independent adult living alone in Los Angeles. And they abused that authority out of their own jealousy or selfishness, or I think in some cases antisocial or narcissistic behavior. And since that time, I've helped my gay male clients in my practice with workplace bullying issues and being abused by perpetrators, either male or female. And I think gay men can be more vulnerable to workplace bullying than straight men, especially from straight women who don't really respect gay men as men and seek to take advantage of our stereotype well-behaved or nice demeanor, thinking that we are easy targets, to step on their way up the ladder, because they don't really think that we have the cojones to fight back. And to some degree, they're right. Gay men can be reluctant to stand up for themselves due to their history of minority stress and being intimidated by those in power against us. Workplace bullying or sexual harassment is a trauma because it is a betrayal of the trust that we put into bosses or colleagues, or even subordinates, and it undermines what is supposed to be a safe space for us to spend many hours in our work in order to earn our livelihood. So when something monkeys with that, it really shakes the core foundation of adult functioning to have a job, to earn a paycheck, to pay our rent or our mortgage, to put food on the table, just to live. And so when that environment is sullied, it really cuts deep, especially if we don't have an immediate alternative to go to. If we can't just quit and live off savings, if we don't have that, or we can't just pick up and go to another job if another appropriate job is not available. So when we are being victimized in that location of the workplace, and yet we still need our jobs, we can be traumatized by the helplessness and the rage against the injustice of that, the injustice of somebody abusing their position of power out of their own selfish ends. So what is the coping with this? So in my case, and in the case of my clients, getting a new job and just getting out can be the best and perhaps most obvious coping strategy. Get out, get far away. But sometimes this experience requires making reports to human resources, demanding that higher management intervene. Or it involves being a plaintiff in a legal complaint, and I've helped clients with that too, not only for justice for themselves, but also on a social or a civic or political or social level that teaches our society that gay men bash back, and that we won't be intimidated or victimized by those who hold arbitrary anti-gay antipathy against us. This shows the importance of supporting political candidates who advocate for legal workplace protections for all vulnerable groups, and for political candidates who support tort policies so that we have formal legal mechanisms for fighting back informal complaints against those who would abuse us and sully the workplace environment. And ultimately, it's about moving on to surround ourselves with just a better class of people who respect us and either support us or at the very least leave us alone. And sometimes that can take time, and sometimes the internal resource that we need the most in this is a certain amount of patience with the process. It also involves something called affect regulation, because the anger can make us want to rip somebody's head off, but that doesn't exactly help things. So we have to kind of regulate, what we're going through, and we focus on the job, or we focus on the customers or the clients we serve, or we focus on the profession itself, and maybe we build a support system against the perpetrator. That can be very complex. Ultimately, I think it's best to just move on to an environment that is not what's sometimes known as the sick office, because of the pathology of the people involved, particularly in leadership positions like a department head or something like that. Number 6, the second of our categories for today, is family of origin trauma. So this can be different types of abuse, childhood sexual abuse, bullying, sibling issues, illness, poverty, violence, lots of things that happen in the traumatic environment of the family, where we grew up, who our caregivers were, usually our parents, but sometimes foster parents or something like that. Maybe this category should have been first, because trauma that is a result of childhood or family of origin experiences are especially powerful in their ability to cause post-traumatic stress disorder or other long-lasting negative effects. So being physically or sexually or emotionally abused by parents or other caregivers, or childhood bullying by school peers, is damaging. And what we're learning lately in research, one of the things that's different from the time that I was in grad school to now in the discussion of therapy and how people recover in a mental health sense, is about the neurobiology. So when children, or when anybody is exposed to a trauma, there are neurobiological changes in how the brain reacts. And for children, it can affect the developing brain and really put us at a disadvantage, which is why it's such a serious issue, because it's kind of, in a very negative way, the gift that keeps on giving to have childhood trauma that affects our neurobiology. Sometimes it can be about being abused by a sibling, usually an older sibling. That can be a trauma. I worked with one client for a long time on that. It wasn't an abusive parent. It was a torturous older sibling that really kind of had something wrong with them. Childhood injury or illness that required a long physical recovery can be a trauma. In the history of the United States in the early 20th century, a child having polio, or some of the other childhood diseases that now with vaccines we don't hear much about. But in history, childhood injury that came from illness was definitely a hardship in many American families, and even can be the cause of death for many children, before we had vaccines and medicines that help those very same children to be able to overcome or not get that kind of disease in the first place. Growing up in a violent neighborhood, like a gang-infested neighborhood in an urban setting, globally being in some kind of a war zone. I have a friend in Kiev, Ukraine, and the shelling is an almost everyday occurrence, and yet somehow they have to move on with everyday life, and we just hope very much that they're safe. Poverty can be a trauma of its own. I worked with a client who talked about being poor and not really having enough money for food for all of his family and his siblings, and that was part of what motivated him to later become a great executive in Hollywood, making all kinds of money, and part of that was just a determination to never face the hardship of poverty again. These traumas are especially harmful because, again, they involve a reversal or a betrayal of trust of either someone or some place that we were supposed to feel safe in. We naturally expect our parents to protect us. We're children, they're adults, duh. We expect our home or even our hometown to be a nurturing environment, a good place to live. We expect our babysitters or our caregivers to do their jobs of protecting us when parents or other primary caregivers have to be away. Our schools and our teachers, there are many noble teachers who toil away for not very much money sometimes, and they really deserve a medal. But there are some teachers who are sick and actually sadistic. I had this experience of observing teachers who really had a personality disorder and were sadistic, and with my adult mind, yet remembering what they said, if I had it to do over again, I would have really come at them hard. So, schools and teachers can be exquisite places of nurturing and learning, or they can also be the source of trauma. And that's from either fellow students or actually from teachers or administrators. We expect when we're children that our young bodies will grow strong and healthy steadily, that the normal process of physical and emotional and social development will take place. But that's not always the case. Any of these kinds of childhood traumas and others I'm not thinking of can actually harm us severely because of their proximity to the inner sanctum of our home or school or other family areas that we're naturally taught to believe should be safe spaces. So what's the coping for that? Coping with childhood trauma as adults has many components, such as being believed by others about the truth about what really happened to us. That is such a huge issue, about being believed. Oh, that never happened to you, or no, you're not remembering it correctly. The invalidation of someone challenging our own memory. Now, there was the phenomenon in mental health a while back about false memory syndrome, and that was a real problem in mental health because it was a scandal of incompetence among mental health professionals. My very respected colleague David Ley, L-E-Y, Dr. Ley, who's been a part of my training, particularly in my credential as a nationally certified sex therapist, has done some excellent writing about why the false memory syndrome in psychotherapy clients, was just such a tragic era in mental health services delivery. But, there's also the other side to that where it's so important for people who have been through experiences to be believed. They know the truth about what they went through, particularly with an abusive parent. And sometimes the other parent or their siblings don't believe them. That's a trauma in and of itself. That's a double whammy. It's the trauma of the traumatic experience of being sexually abused, for example, and then it's also the trauma of being invalidated and disbelieved, as if our experience or as if our feelings weren't important. So learning how the childhood traumas affected our physical and mental and psychological and developmental and neurobiological well-being so that we can come to terms with our past in order to reclaim our present and our future for ourselves, in the name of living a good life, which includes adult romantic relationships and a healthy, rewarding adult sexuality. Coping involves understanding where we were, what happened, how it affected us then, and how it affects us now. We reclaim. I always say in trauma recovery, the number one most important word is the word reclaiming. We reclaim the right to declare that what happened to us as children was not morally or developmentally right, and to demand justice if we can. Such as the Catholic Church pre-sexual abuse financial settlements that we hear so much about. We declare that what happened to us growing up doesn't necessarily have to affect us throughout adulthood. We're not letting our perpetrator off the hook by saying that they ruined our lives and being miserable our whole life. If anything, we tell our perpetrator to go to hell by living our best life and saying, look, buddy boy, or look, lady, or whoever it was, your indulgence and your sadism against me as a child is not going to affect me as an adult. No way. That ends here. And that's part of what recovery is. And this may or may not require confronting or even forgiving our childhood perpetrators, either directly, talking to them or writing to them or calling them, or maybe it's just in our own heads and hearts. Many of my clients have written letters to their perpetrators as an exercise and read them aloud, to me or just to the air, or even to a grave's headstone if the perpetrator's dead. Because it's about expressing your feelings and kind of speaking truth to power. Coping can be a series of meaningful healing events and a process that can take many forms as we develop as young, middle-aged, and older adults throughout the lifespan. Sometimes if we come to terms with childhood trauma as a young adult, it changes by the time we go through the midlife changes, and it might change again as we become senior citizens, because our experiences at different phases of our adult lifespan might change how we interpret what happened to us as children, because we are coming from a different psychological age in each phase of our lifespan, and it takes on different meaning. We might go from sadness to anger to coping to acceptance, and maybe that motivates us to do something. Maybe if we were victims or survivors of something, maybe we turn around and somehow become advocates or activists or authors to help others maybe to not go through what we went through. That would be something that would be characteristics of older people who want to leave something behind and help leave the world a better place than the one that they found and lived through. Number 7 is a political trauma. Now, we don't hear that much about that, but I think gay men know, what I'm talking about when I say that. In the state of Florida, the Don't Say Gay law in Florida public schools, Proposition 8 in California that for a time in 2008 outlawed same-sex marriage by a ballot proposition, until the Supreme Court overruled all of that nationally and marriage equality became the law of the land in all 50 states. But, that could be subject to being undermined, just like the right to choose abortion in Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Trump-supported Supreme Court in the United States this year. So, we can be betrayed by our political systems. In the United States, we're raised with phrases in school like, we are all created equal, or that we have the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet in that same country, we have states like Texas or Florida with the Don't Say Gay laws that oppress our school systems, or the recent really vicious anti-trans bills that are in multiple states in the U.S. saying children can't play a sport they love because of some wild, irrational fear fantasies born out of ignorance and hate that don't have any evidence to back them up. This idea that boys are going to dress up as girls and rape girls in girls' restrooms, okay, that's not a thing. And yet, they have laws on the books as if it were some kind of a crime that they're responding to that hasn't played out in reality. But the ignorance and the hate about trans issues, particularly for trans women or trans girls, gets played out in terms of actual laws on the books because of discrimination. And across the world, anti-LGBT laws or even just cultural attitudes can be traumatic for people who happen to be LGBT. Being betrayed by the very society that we are born into is a trauma. We expected to come into this life in a reasonably civil context, and sometimes we get anything but civil treatment by our elected leaders. They very specifically target LGBT people, and I think specifically trans women and gay men, because it has political power. They play on those fears, and it'll raise money for their campaigns, or it'll get their hackles up, and they'll have power and influence because they're playing into a particularly ignorant type of person's irrational fears. It's very effective politically and emotionally, even though it's very underhanded. So what's the coping for a political trauma? Coping with political trauma means having the seemingly indefatigable energy to fight back on those legal, political, social, and cultural levels. Even on a financial level, remember that marriage equality was a case decided by the U.S. Supreme Court that originally came from a lesbian woman who was paying inheritance taxes and said, if we were married, I wouldn't have to pay all these inheritance taxes from my partner who passed away. And the Supreme Court was like, yeah, you're kind of right. I guess we should have equal tax policies. And that's what created marriage equality. Basically, I'm oversimplifying that, but that's kind of where it came from. And it came from a tax law and financial aspect. Never mind love and peace and love and relationships and lovey-dovey, romantic, sentimental things. It was about equal rights under the law in terms of taxes and finances. There's privilege in that, but yet, the law should cover everyone equally, of making everyone equally accessible to marriage equality. So we cope also by seemingly tirelessly engaging in activities to educate or re-educate, especially in the case of trans issues, advocate, protest, and demand that political injustices either stop or are never enacted into law and policy in the first place. The proposition in California years ago from some nutcase who wanted to systematically fire every gay teacher in the entire public school system in California. And it was defeated, but it was only defeated by the work of pioneering gay rights activism, Harvey Milk, and lots of activists. Or removing sodomy laws. That was a Supreme Court decision, I think, in the 80s. There have been lots of work from our advocacy organizations, Human Rights Campaign, National Center for Lesbian Rights, National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. There's just been Gay Lesbian Student Educational Network. So I might have gotten that wrong. Actually, GLSEN, GLSEN is the acronym. But, being a part of these organizations, either as workers or as donors, can somehow influence the collective political environment that then boils down to the specific circumstances of our lives. Having a global law or a national law that gives us marriage equality boils down to, can I marry my boyfriend? Or can we adopt children? Or can my trans daughter play field hockey because she wants to? Something like that. So the coping is not only for ourselves, but also for generations to come and for our colleagues and the other LGBT communities in the present day. I think as gay men, we should be supporting issues of well-being to lesbians. I think gay and lesbian people should be stepping up for the rights of bisexuals. And I think lesbians and gays and bisexuals should be stepping up for the rights of trans masculine and trans feminine people, because all of the LGBT subdivisions can come together for advocacy, and I think come together for advocacy with other minority groups. There's a lot of overlap between things like LGBT civil rights under the law and civil rights laws that might protect black people or Latino people or immigrants or Asians, any other kind of minority group. Collectively, if we all banded together in our commonality of being minority stress groups, we might have less minority stress, right? And we do that on a collective level, organizationally. But then we also do it, individually. We can also each ourselves speak truth to power and talk about what it means in our lives to be able to marry the one we love, or to be able to become parents, or to have the job that we want, or to have protections against being fired from the job that we like. So, there have been an entire history of political traumas, but there's also been a history of the individual and the collective coping strategies for those of and that battle seems to be promising to go on for a very long time. The next one, number 8, our last one, is social or peer losses and traumas. So we can have social or peer traumatic loss as well. So many gay men experienced a loss of so many of their gay male peers to the AIDS crisis, especially in urban settings like New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Miami and many other places, large and small. I've done a lot of work in HIV mental health in the history of my career and attended national conferences. And, we tend to think of the big gay meccas, right? New York and San Francisco and LA. But, certainly small cities were drastically impacted by HIV and AIDS and still are. We can have a certain traumatic loss socially when we leave high school or college, and a group of peer friends that we maybe have grown up with from a very young age kind of cease to be with us, especially if we relocate for a job or for a relationship. We can even perhaps have a mild trauma of leaving work friends when we change jobs. Losing people that we have spent literally thousands of hours with in the office, and those relationships are over the minute that we clean out our desk and go home and go to a new job. Or either because we're going to a new job, or maybe we're suddenly laid off due to some kind of an economic convenience of the organization we were once loyal to and made personal sacrifices for, and they tell us at 2 p.m. to be out by 5 p.m. for good. We can have a certain social traumatic loss when we somehow lose a group of friends, people drift apart, or as a recent client discussed with me, being cast out suddenly by his clique or his group of gay male peer friends for reasons that no one in the group really made clear to him. He just was suddenly ostracized, leaving him not only with the loss but also being bewildered of why that happened to him by this group of friends. So what's the coping for that? We cope with these losses by understanding that our social relationships are fluid throughout the lifespan and they evolve over time. The same people who attended your 30th birthday party might not be all the ones who attend your 50th. This is why people tend to cling to family of origin and especially sibling relationships, because blood is thicker than water, and these relationships tend to endure when others can be transient, even among so-called best friends. Now, I think the cultivation of a family of choice is important, but there's also a big emphasis on family of origin because, in general, our family of origin tends to endure throughout the lifespan, even when family of choice relationships don't, because people move or needs just change. Social identities and needs change in our circles of friends. So by accepting that different people will likely form the cast of characters at different points in our lives, we adaptively cope with social change as our needs change throughout the lifespan. So in conclusion, I just want to point out notice how each of these sections or these types of traumas, and it's not an exhaustive list of the kinds of traumas a person can endure, but each of them has an adaptive coping strategy in response to what happens to us. We're not helpless. It's not the end of the world. We're not victims. We can always adaptively cope, at least a little bit, with whatever happens to us. And that's so key to quality of life on the other side of a bad experience. Evolution and history teach us all that adaptive coping is not only survival of the fittest, but those most able to adapt to their surroundings, to survive and thrive for as long as life takes us. So whatever traumatic experiences in your past or currently, or even what you might face in the future, please consider identifying and implementing the adaptive coping responses that will mitigate them. They might be classic, or they might be unique ways of reclaiming your life and working through the trauma to a healing on the other side. And that might be an approach that's unique to you. So if you need help with mounting an adaptive coping response to trauma or even mild inconveniences, please consider therapy if you're a resident of California, or coaching services, individual or relationship or executive, if you're in other states or other cities in the world. Because these professional support services are probably most often utilized for trauma because, as the saying goes, shit happens in life and we need support for that. And you don't need to face it alone. Is the old saying, company doubles your joys and halves your sorrows. So for more information on being a client of mine, if you feel these services might help you cope with something that's going on for you, feel free to call in the United States 310-339-5778. That's 310-339-5778. Or you can email me, ken@gaytherapyla.com. And remember that the gaytherapyla.com website contains information about me, about my services, the entire blog article history that has different kinds of hyperlinks to internal other blog articles that are relevant and maybe outside resources. And that's in addition to the other episodes of the show here that you might like. Remember, you're always welcome to contact me with suggestions of future episodes. More of you guys are doing that, and that's great. It's always fun to hear from you and hear your suggestions for future episodes. Stay tuned for those. A special shout out to the folks in outside the United States. I get statistics on who's listening to the show across the world, and I'm really fascinated to hear, hi Croatia, hi Sri Lanka, hi, I'm thrilled with that, because gay men's needs are generally underserved globally, and, certainly appreciate my California listeners and all across the United States, but, we're part of a global community, and I think when I see those statistics, I think about how gay men form a global community, like a big fraternity across the world, and there are ways that we can support each other, and I think that's great, because we need to find ways to support each other for our individual circumstances. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.